There are moments in history when the world pivots on the axis of a single life, when one human being's refusal to accept limitation reshapes the destiny of billions yet unborn. The year is 1844. In the German town of Mühlberg, as dawn breaks over cobblestone streets still ruled by horses, a woman goes into labor. Her husband, a locomotive engineer, has already left for his shift, climbing aboard a machine that thunders along iron rails at speeds that make passengers grip their seats in terror and exhilaration. He does not know that this day will deliver both a son and a tragedy, that the same revolution in transportation he serves will claim his life just 2 years hence, leaving that infant boy to grow up in the shadow of mechanical promise and personal catastrophe. Before we continue this journey, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extraordinary for you. The child is named Carl Friedrich Benz. Consider what it means to enter the world at such a moment. The Industrial Revolution has already transformed Britain into a landscape of smoking chimneys and clattering looms. Steam power, that ancient dream of turning water into motion, has finally been captured, controlled, and put to work. Railways thread across continents like steel veins, pumping commerce through the body of civilization. Factories spring up almost overnight, their machines producing in hours what craftsmen once labored months to create. The old world of muscle and animal strength is dying, replaced by something unprecedented, something almost magical in its implications. Machines that can work without rest, without complaint, without the biological limits that have constrained human ambition since we first stood upright on African plains. Yet here is the paradox young Carl inherits. While locomotives race at speeds exceeding 50 kilometers per hour, while steamships cross oceans, while factories churn out goods by the thousands, the roads remain locked in medieval time. Horses pull carriages just as they did for Alexander the Great, just as they did for Julius Caesar, just as they have for 3,000 years of recorded history. The streets of every city on earth are caked with manure, sometimes piled nearly a meter high, the smell so omnipresent that residents cease to notice it. In London alone, 50,000 horses die each year from exhaustion and disease, their carcasses removed by special crews who work through the night. The promise of the machine age somehow cannot cross the threshold from rail to road, from controlled track to open countryside. When Carl's father dies, crushed between steel and steam in an accident that takes mere seconds to unfold, the family plunges into poverty so sudden and complete it takes your breath away. His mother, left with debts that exceed 2 years' wages, must make impossible choices. She could remarry, surrender her independence for security. She could send young Carl to work in the factories where children his age labor 12 hours daily for pennies. Instead, she does something that seems almost reckless in its faith. She takes in laundry, ruins her hands with scalding water and harsh soap, works hours that stretch from before dawn until after midnight, all to keep her son in school. Imagine being that boy. You watch your mother's hands crack and bleed. You see her age 5 years for every one that passes. You understand, with the clarity that only poverty can bring, that education is not some abstract good but a rope thrown across an abyss. And what does young Carl do with this sacrifice? He builds engines from scraps. Not toys, not simple mechanisms, but actual functioning engines cobbled together from pieces scavenged from junkyards and donated by sympathetic machinists. Each creation grows more sophisticated than the last. At age 12, he constructs a working model steam engine. At 14, a clockwork mechanism with 17 moving parts, each one hand-filed to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. His teachers notice. How could they not? Here is a boy who solves in his head calculations that others require paper and pencil to approach, who looks at a machine and seems to see not just what it is, but what it could become. who asks questions that reveal an intuitive grasp of mechanical principles that scholars spend careers trying to articulate. They urge his mother to send him to the Karlsruhe Polytechnic, one of Europe's finest technical schools. The cost is staggering, impossible really, but his mother finds a way. Always finds a way, working herself to the very edge of physical collapse. At the Polytechnic, Karl enters a world divided by invisible but absolute barriers. His classmates are sons of industrialists and aristocrats, young men whose monthly allowances exceed his mother's annual income. They arrive in tailored clothes and leave for parties in their families' carriages. Karl owns 2 shirts and 1 pair of trousers, patched so many times the original fabric has nearly disappeared. Yet in the workshop, in the laboratory, these distinctions evaporate like morning dew. Mechanical problems do not care about your father's bank account. Engines do not run on inherited wealth. His professors watch in amazement as this scholarship student, this poor boy who smells faintly of the lamp oil he studies by to save candles, surpasses wealthy peers who have every advantage. He has something they lack, something that cannot be purchased or inherited, an intuition for how force becomes motion, how pressure becomes power, how inert metal can be arranged to perform work. It flows from him naturally, this understanding, as though the language of machines is his native tongue, and all others merely speak it as awkward second languages. The world around him continues its transformation. By the time Karl reaches his 20s, Europe has become a completely different place than the one his grandparents knew. Railways connect every major city. Telegraph lines carry messages at the speed of lightning. Photography captures moments in time, making permanent what memory makes fleeting. The pace of change accelerates until it seems impossible anything could remain unchanged. Yet still, horses dominate the roads. Still, humans travel overland at speeds that would be familiar to their medieval ancestors. At age 27, Karl meets Bertha Ringer, and here the story takes a turn that seems almost too perfect for fiction. She is the daughter of Karl Ringer, a successful construction company owner whose personal worth exceeds 200,000 marks, a fortune almost incomprehensible to someone of Karl's background. Her father can provide dowry enough to secure her future in comfort and luxury. Young men from prestigious families compete for her attention, each one offering security, status, social position. And what does she see when she meets this poor inventor, this man whose workshop smells of oil and desperation, whose hands are perpetually stained with grease, whose future is anything but certain? She sees the fire. That's the only way to describe it. Some people contain a flame that refuses to be extinguished by circumstance or probability. Karl speaks to her not of what is, but of what could be, should be, must be. He describes a carriage that moves without horses, powered by controlled explosions happening dozens of times each second. He draws diagrams on scraps of paper, his hands moving rapidly as he explains differentials and combustion cycles and power-to-weight ratios. Most people would hear madness in such talk. Bertha hears destiny. Their wedding in 1872 joins not just 2 hearts, but 2 fundamentally complementary forces. Karl possesses explosive creativity that generates ideas faster than he can implement them. A mind that leaps from problem to stock, solution to new problem, in cascading sequences. This same quality makes him terrible with money, indifferent to social niceties, prone to obsessive focus that ignores everything except the mechanical challenge immediately before him. Bertha brings what he lacks: business acumen, social intelligence, the ability to think strategically about resources and timing. His technical genius requires her stabilizing wisdom. Her practical skills need his visionary audacity. Together they establish an iron foundry in Mannheim, their first attempt at financial independence. Imagine what this means. They are pouring molten metal at temperatures that can melt human flesh in seconds, creating beams and girders and structural components for the buildings and bridges that industrial Germany demands in endless quantities. The work is dangerous, exhausting, technically demanding, yet even as they pour metal into molds, they are pouring their hopes into something far more ambitious, far more impossible. Karl begins sketching designs for his horseless carriage. At night, after 12-hour shifts at the foundry, he sits at a desk covered in technical drawings, calculating force vectors and compression ratios by lamplight. The challenge seems overwhelming when you truly contemplate its requirements. The engine must be small enough to fit on a carriage, light enough that the carriage can move, yet powerful enough to carry passengers and cargo at useful speeds. It must be reliable enough to start consistently, efficient enough to travel meaningful distances on available fuel, simple enough to maintain without specialized equipment. But here is the truly staggering part. Nothing like this exists. The stationary engines powering factories weigh thousands of kilograms and require buildings to house them. Model engines can barely move themselves, let alone useful loads. Karl is not improving an existing design. He is not iterating on previous work. He is attempting to create something entirely new, something that requires solving dozens of interlocking problems simultaneously, each solution dependent on others not yet discovered. Bertha watches him work, understands what she is married into. This is not a man who will ever be satisfied with comfortable prosperity. This is not someone who can walk past an unsolved problem without being drawn into its orbit like a comet toward the sun. She has chosen a life of risk, of uncertainty, of dreams that might consume everything they build together. And she has chosen correctly, though the cost of that choice has not yet fully revealed itself. The Industrial Revolution thunders forward around them. Factories multiply across Germany, transforming it from an agricultural backwater into an industrial powerhouse. Railways expand until you can travel from Berlin to Munich entirely by rail. Telegraph wires carry news between cities faster than horses could carry riders. Steam power has proven itself beyond all doubt. Yet road, the transportation remains locked in the past, horses and donkeys, and human muscle the only options for anything lacking rails beneath it. Consider the magnitude of what Karl and Bertha are attempting. They are not just building a machine, they are betting everything, their money, their time, their very lives, on the proposition that what seems impossible is merely difficult, that the future need not resemble the past, that individual human beings, armed with nothing but intelligence and determination, can alter the trajectory of civilization itself. The iron foundry begins producing revenue, enough to survive but not enough to fund Karl's automotive dreams. He works his regular job, then returns home to work on his real passion. Bertha manages the business by day and encourages his experiments by night. Their first child arrives, then their second, adding joy and responsibility in equal measure. The workshop in their home grows steadily more sophisticated, filling with lathes and vices and measuring tools, each piece of equipment purchased through careful saving and strategic sacrifice. At night, when the children sleep and the city falls quiet, Karl sits in his workshop surrounded by parts and plans and possibilities. The path forward remains unclear, obscured by technical challenges that would daunt any rational person. Yet he persists, sketching and calculating, building and testing, failing and learning, moving forward one small revelation at a time. Somewhere in this chaos of metal and mathematics and mechanical intuition lies the future of transportation. Somewhere in this impossible tangle of problems lies a solution that will transform how every human being on Earth travels. The dream has taken root, planted in rocky ground, nourished by sacrifice and stubbornness and a love strong enough to sustain them through what is coming. For what they do not yet know, what they cannot yet see, is that the truly difficult part lies ahead. The years of crushing, failure, the public mockery, the financial disasters that will bring them to the very edge of ruin, the moments when surrender seems not just reasonable but necessary for survival. But that is tomorrow's story. Tonight, in 1872, Carl and Bertha Benz stand together in their workshop, young and hopeful, and convinced that the impossible is merely a problem not yet solved. Tomorrow they will begin learning just how expensive that belief can be. There is a special kind of suffering reserved for those who can see the future clearly yet cannot quite reach it. It is not the suffering of ignorance, where you do not know what you are missing, nor is it the suffering of impossibility, where your dreams defy the laws of physics. No, this is the agony of almost, where success hovers just beyond your fingertips, visible and tantalizingly close, yet separated by obstacles that drain your resources, test your sanity, and threaten to consume everything you have built. By 1877, Carl and Bertha's iron foundry is dying. Not slowly, not with warning signs that allow for adjustment, but hemorrhaging money like a severed artery. The problem is not their work. Carl's calculations are impeccable. His materials meet every specification. But there are forces in engineering that textbooks cannot capture, phenomena that emerge only when structures face real-world conditions. A bridge in Stuttgart, built with their materials, begins resonating in the wind. The vibrations are subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Then they build, amplifying until the structure shakes itself apart in a cascade of mechanical failure that seems to defy logic. The collapse kills no one, thankfully, but it kills something else: reputation. Engineers who once competed for Benz materials now send their business elsewhere. The fact that Carl followed every standard, that his work contained no errors, matters not at all. In the court of public opinion, failure is absolute. It does not matter why the bridge fell. It only matters that it fell. Other contracts unravel like thread pulled from cloth. A building project in Mannheim cancels its order. A railway expansion chooses another supplier. Each lost sale compounds the crisis, reducing cash flow until they cannot pay suppliers, cannot meet payroll, cannot maintain the equipment that keeps the foundry running. August Ritter, Carl's business partner, responds to stress the way some men do, with rage. Arguments between them escalate from words to violence. During one confrontation about unpaid bills, Ritter hurls a hammer that passes close enough to Carl's head that he feels the wind of its passage. It strikes the wall behind him with a sound like a gunshot, leaving a dent in the plaster that Bertha will see every day for months, a reminder of how close she came to widowhood. The partnership has become toxic, poisonous, destroying more than it creates. The dissolution cost 20,000 marks. They do not have. Think about that number for a moment. It represents more than 5 years of a skilled worker's wages. It is enough to buy a house, to live comfortably for a decade. And Carl does not have it. He has debts, equipment that must be sold, obligations that multiply faster than revenue. Banks that once competed for his business now send collectors who walk through his workshop with notebooks, cataloguing tools and machinery, calculating auction values while he watches in silent agony. Bertha performs what can only be described as financial alchemy. Her dowry, that fortune her father provided as security against an uncertain world, becomes the salvation of Carl's dreams. 200,000 marks, carefully invested and managed, is their last reserve. Her father, Carl Ringer, thunders his objections. He did not accumulate this wealth by throwing good money after bad. He did not provide for his daughter so she could pour her inheritance into a failing business run by a man who seems more dreamer than businessman. The arguments between them are volcanic, father and daughter shouting across distances of generation and philosophy. But Bertha stands firm. She has seen something in Carl that her father cannot perceive. She understands that traditional business wisdom does not apply to someone trying to create something entirely new. The rules of commerce, the metrics of success, the timelines of profitability, all become meaningless when you're attempting to birth a future that does not yet exist. She signs the papers that transfer her money into Carl's workshop, that transform her security into his possibility. It is an act of faith so profound that it takes your breath away. The two-stroke engine becomes Carl's obsession through 1878 and 79. Each prototype consumes precious funds, precious time, precious hope. He is trying to create something that sounds simple when described but becomes nightmarishly complex in implementation. A device that converts fuel into controlled explosions into rotational motion, all happening smoothly enough that humans can ride without being shaken apart. Version 1 explodes on its first test, sending shrapnel into the ceiling. Version 2 seizes after 10 minutes of operation, its pistons welded by heat to cylinder walls. Version 3 runs for an hour before vibrating itself to pieces, literally disassembling from its own operation. Each failure teaches him something, reveals another variable he had not adequately considered. But learning is expensive. Each prototype requires materials, machining time, testing that consumes fuel and energy. The pile of failed engines in his workshop grows into a monument to persistence or madness, depending on who is judging. The fundamental challenge seems almost impossible when you truly examine it. Fuel must mix with air in precise ratios. This mixture must compress to exact pressures. Ignition must occur at the perfect microsecond, not too early or too late by even thousandths of a second. The resulting explosion must push a piston that turns a crankshaft that produces smooth rotation despite being powered by sequential detonations. All of this must happen dozens of times per second, thousands of times per minute, for hours without failure. And that is just the engine. The engine must then power a vehicle. It must produce enough force to overcome friction, gravity, air resistance. It must accelerate smoothly, maintain speed, slow controllably. The power must transfer from engine to wheels through mechanisms that do not yet exist. The vehicle must steer, must balance, must survive roads that are designed for horses, not machines. Every component requires invention or adaptation. There are no suppliers for automobile parts because automobiles do not exist. Carl discovers that electricity can provide perfectly timed ignition. This seems like a breakthrough until he realizes that generating electricity while moving requires another invention. He needs a magneto that produces electrical current from mechanical rotation that creates sparks powerful enough to ignite compressed fuel. He must design coils that transform voltage, contacts that can open and close thousands of times without wearing out, insulation that withstands heat and vibration. Each solution creates new problems in an endless cascade. The flywheel problem nearly breaks him. The flywheel must store energy between power strokes, smoothing the pulsing explosions into steady rotation. Make it too light, and the engine runs roughly, shaking itself apart. Make it too heavy, and the engine cannot accelerate it, cannot overcome its inertia. There is a perfect weight somewhere between these extremes, but finding it requires calculations that push the limits of existing mathematics, combined with testing that consumes resources they can barely afford. Cooling presents another seemingly insurmountable challenge. The explosions inside the pie engine generate temperatures that can melt iron. Without cooling, the engine destroys itself in minutes. But cooling systems add weight, add complexity, add points of failure. Carl experiments with air cooling, water cooling, oil cooling. Each approach has advantages and devastating disadvantages. Air cooling is simple but insufficient. Water cooling works but freezes in winter. Oil cooling adds expense and maintenance. The solution, when he finally discovers it, combines multiple approaches in ways that seem obvious only after someone thinks of them first. By the end of 1879, Carl has been working on his automobile for 7 years. 7 years of poverty, of mockery, of watching his wife's inheritance disappear into prototypes that refuse to function. 7 years of telling Bertha that success is just around the corner, just one more modification away, just one more breakthrough needed. 7 years of his children asking why father spends all his time in the workshop, why they cannot have things other families have, why mother sometimes cries when she thinks they are not watching. On New Year's Eve 1879, Bertha finds Carl collapsed beside his latest engine. Not injured, not physically harmed, but broken in a way that goes deeper than muscle or bone. He is weeping from exhaustion and despair, from the accumulated weight of 7 years of almost, of so close, of not quite. She holds him while he sobs, this man who has sacrificed everything for a dream that refuses to materialize. When he finally speaks, his voice is hollow. Perhaps they should stop. Perhaps this is the universe's way of saying the automobile is not meant to be. Perhaps he is not smart enough, not skilled enough, not worthy enough to accomplish what he has set out to do. Perhaps they should focus on stationary engines, a proven market, a path to actual prosperity. Perhaps he has been selfish, asking her to sacrifice her comfort and security for his obsession. Bertha makes him promise 1 more year. If the engine does not work by next New Year's Eve, if they cannot demonstrate a functioning prototype, they will abandon the automobile dream. They will build stationary engines, boring and reliable and profitable. They will live like normal people, with predictable income and retirement savings and nothing visionary or magnificent or world-changing. 1 more year. That is all she asks. Give the dream one final chance before surrendering to practicality. This deadline transforms Carl's approach. He has been pursuing perfection, trying to create the ideal engine that will work flawlessly forever. But perfect is the enemy of done. The engine does not need to be perfect. It needs to be good enough to prove the concept, to demonstrate that a horseless carriage can function. Reliability can be improved later. Efficiency can be enhanced through iteration. Right now, he needs something that works, period. The change in philosophy accelerates his progress dramatically. Instead of agonizing over every design decision, he makes choices quickly and moves forward. If something does not work, he modifies and tests again. Version follows version in rapid succession, each one incorporating lessons from its predecessor. The pile of failed engines continues growing, but the gap between failure and success narrows with each attempt. With 12 months counting down like a bomb fuse, every decision becomes crucial. Which design offers the best chance of success with available resources? Which problems must be solved perfectly, and which can be addressed adequately? Where should he spend his limited time, his limited money, his limited energy? The pressure is crushing, relentless, the kind that drives lesser men to abandon their dreams or lose their minds entirely. Yet pressure sometimes reveals strength that comfort keeps hidden. Carl works hours that seem inhuman. He is in the workshop before dawn and remains until after midnight. He eats standing up, sleeps in his chair, dreams in mechanical diagrams. Bertha brings him food he barely tastes, insists he rest, though he rarely does. The children learn to be quiet when father is working, understand that something momentous is happening even if they cannot fully grasp what. The months tick by with terrifying speed. January becomes February, becomes March. Each day brings Carl closer to either triumph or surrender. He is not just racing against the calendar. He is racing against poverty, against mockery, against the voice in his head that whispers he is not good enough. He is racing against every person who laughed at the idea of a horseless carriage, every banker who refused to invest, every engineer who said it could not be done. By December, the engine runs for minutes at a time before failing, then tens of minutes, then an hour. The problems are narrowing, the solutions converging. Carl can feel success approaching the way sailors sense land. Before seeing it, Some instinct that says the journey is nearly complete, but nearly is not the same as finished. Almost is not the same as accomplished, and the deadline approaches with the inexorability of time itself, indifferent to human hope or effort. New Year's Eve 1879 arrives like Judgment Day. Either the dream lives or dies tonight. Either 7 years of sacrifice mean something, or they represent the greatest mistake of their lives. Carl and Bertha stand in the workshop, their 2 young sons asleep upstairs, unaware that their family's future is about to be decided. The latest engine sits bolted to the bench, 250 cubic centimeters of precisely machined potential. It might work, or it might fail like all the others. The next hours will determine everything. Will this be the moment when the impossible becomes inevitable? Or will it be another failure in an endless series, the one that finally breaks Carl's spirit and forces them to surrender their dreams? There is no way to know, except to try. Carl reaches for the flywheel. Bertha positions herself at the fuel valve. Together, synchronized through countless practice runs, they prepare to discover whether their marriage to a dream will be blessed or cursed. The moment stretches. Somewhere in Germany, other families are celebrating the new year, toasting their health and happiness, kissing at midnight. In the Benz workshop, there is only tension, hope, fear, and the weight of 7 years pressing down on them like a physical force. Everything depends on what happens next. There are moments that divide time into before and after, when the universe shifts on hinges so small they can be held in human hands. You cannot see these moments coming. They arrive disguised as ordinary seconds, indistinguishable from the millions that preceded them. Only later, looking back across the landscape of history, can you identify the instant when everything changed. Carl spins the flywheel. His hands, scarred from 7 years of mechanical warfare, grip the wheel with practiced confidence, masking absolute terror. 1 revolution, 2, 3. Building momentum, building potential, building toward either vindication or one more crushing disappointment. Bertha operates the fuel valve, her movements precise to the millimeter. They have rehearsed this sequence so many times that their bodies move without conscious thought, muscle memory, carrying them through actions that their minds are too anxious to direct. The engine coughs. Just once, a single cylinder firing, a solitary explosion in steel chambers designed to contain and direct violence. For 1 heartbeat, nothing else happens. The workshop holds its breath. Then the engine coughs again, and again. The rhythm is irregular, stuttering, like a patient recovering from illness. But it is a rhythm. The explosions are happening in sequence, each one pushing its piston, each piston turning the crankshaft, the rotation of the crankshaft feeding back into the cycle. The stuttering smooths. 5 explosions per second become steady as a drumbeat. The sound fills the workshop, not the whisper of a model but the authoritative voice of a machine doing real work. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Carl and Bertha stare at each other across the bench, neither daring to speak, neither willing to acknowledge success until success becomes undeniable. The engine runs. It simply runs, converting benzene into motion, performing the alchemy that Carl has pursued through 7 years of failure. 1 minute passes, then 5, then 10. The engine maintains its rhythm, the sound hypnotic and beautiful, proof that the universe can be persuaded to behave in new ways if you ask correctly. 20 minutes. 30. The fuel consumption is higher than ideal. The vibration suggests the flywheel still needs refinement. The cooling system will require improvement. None of that matters. What matters is the sound, steady and strong, of the impossible announcing its arrival. They let it run for an hour, 60 full minutes of continuous operation, 3,600 seconds, several thousand explosions, each converting fuel into force. Carl monitors temperatures, checking that nothing is overheating or breaking down. Bertha watches the fuel consumption, calculating in her head how far such an engine might carry a vehicle. They are together, but separate, each lost in their own recognition of what this moment represents. When they finally shut down the engine at 2 a.m, the silence feels holy. The workshop, so often filled with the sound of Carl's frustration and failure, now contains something entirely different. Proof. Not hope, not possibility, not potential, but actual, demonstrated, irrefutable proof that a small gasoline engine can run continuously, converting liquid fuel into mechanical motion. The foundations of the future have been laid in this cramped workshop, though the world does not yet know it. They hold each other in that silence, not speaking because words are inadequate. 7 years. 7 years of sacrifice and mockery and doubt. 7 years of Bertha's inheritance, disappearing into prototypes that refuse to work. 7 years of their children growing up in poverty while Carl pursued a dream that seemed to recede like the horizon. All of it, every moment of suffering and persistence, has led to this: an engine that runs. But an engine is not an automobile. Running while bolted to a bench is not the same as moving a vehicle along roads. Carl has climbed one mountain only to see another, higher peak beyond. The engine works. Now he must build everything else. The chassis, the wheels, the steering, the power transmission, the brakes, the cooling system, the fuel system, every component necessary to transform a functioning engine into a functioning vehicle. He attacks these challenges with renewed energy. Success, even partial success, is the most powerful motivator. Where failure bred doubt, functioning breeds confidence. Carl knows the engine works because he has heard it work, has felt its vibration, has smelled the burning of benzene becoming motion. Everything else is engineering. Difficult but not impossible, challenging but not insurmountable. The chassis takes 4 months. It must be strong enough to survive roads designed for horse-drawn wagons, roads that are more suggestion than surface, pocked with holes and rutted by wheels and hooves. Yet it must be light enough that a 1-horsepower engine can move it. Carl settles on tubular steel, a framework that achieves strength through geometry rather than mass. The design is elegant, almost bicycle-like in its efficiency. The differential gear nearly defeats him. When a vehicle turns, the outside wheels must travel farther than the inside wheels. On a horse-drawn wagon, this difference is absorbed by the slight slip of wooden wheels on dirt roads. But a motorized vehicle will have greater speed, greater weight, greater forces. Without a differential, the vehicle will fight itself in every turn, destroying its own tires or worse, becoming impossible to steer. 17 attempts. That is how many differential designs Carl builds and tests before achieving smooth operation. The mathematics are complex, requiring calculations of gear ratios and tooth profiles that push his abilities to their limits. Each prototype must be machined with precision, measured in hundredths of millimeters. A slight error and the gears bind or wear excessively. But on the 17th try, the mechanism works perfectly, allowing wheels to rotate at different speeds while still receiving power from the engine. The belt drive system presents another cascade of problems. The engine produces rotational motion. The wheels need rotational motion. Connecting them seems straightforward until you consider the reality. The engine runs at hundreds of revolutions per minute. The wheels must turn much slower. The connection must slip during starts to avoid stalling the engine, yet it must grip firmly during operation to transfer power efficiently. And it must survive the vibration, the temperature changes, the accumulation of dust and moisture. Bertha suggests leather treated with beeswax. It is such a simple idea that Carl almost dismisses it before testing. But her intuition is correct. The leather provides just enough flexibility to slip during engagement, just enough grip to transfer power during operation. The beeswax protects it from moisture and helps it survive temperature extremes. This solution, contributed by someone with no formal engineering training, becomes a crucial component of the world's first automobile. The cooling system saves the engine from melting itself. Water circulates through channels machined into the engine block. Absorbing heat like blood carries warmth through living bodies. The hot water rises into a radiator where airflow dissipates the heat back into the atmosphere. The system is simple in concept but complex in execution, requiring precise calculations of flow rates and surface areas, requiring materials that can withstand both water and heat without corroding or failing. The electrical ignition system might be Carl's greatest technical achievement. Each spark must arrive at exactly the right microsecond, when the piston reaches the top of its compression stroke and the fuel-air mixture achieves optimal density. Too early, and the explosion fights the piston's upward motion. Too late, and power is lost. The trembler coil he designs generates high-voltage sparks from low-voltage input, creating miniature lightning bolts that ignite the fuel with perfect timing thousands of times every minute. By the end of 1885, Carl has created something that has never existed: a complete, self-propelled vehicle, powered by an internal combustion engine. It sits in his workshop like a mechanical sprocket, creature, strange and ungainly, its tubular frame exposing its workings to view. 3 wheels support it, 2 large ones in back powered by the engine, 1 smaller wheel in front for steering. The engine sits openly between the rear wheels, its single-cylinder vertical like a small monument to possibility. The whole apparatus weighs approximately 250 kilograms, light enough that 3 men can lift it, heavy enough that it will need every bit of that 1 horsepower to move. Patent number 37435 is granted on January 29, 1886. The document describes a vehicle with gas engine propulsion in language so dry it could desiccate an ocean. Terms like differential gear, evaporative cooling, spark plug ignition, fill pages with technical specifications that only other engineers could appreciate. Yet this patent represents something more profound than its bureaucratic language suggests. It is the birth certificate of the automobile age. The first public demonstration happens in July 1886. Carl has tested the motor wagon in private, driving it around his workshop yard in circles, adjusting and refining. But he knows that private success means nothing. The world must see, must witness, must understand that the age of the horse is ending whether it chooses to acknowledge it or not. He drives from his workshop into the streets of Mannheim on a warm summer evening. The engine's sound draws people from their homes and shops. They gather along the street, pointing and shouting, some in amazement, others in mockery. The motor wagon moves under its own power. No horses pulling it, no visible source of propulsion except the strange machine between its rear wheels. Carl steers carefully, aware that any mistake will be remembered, will be used as evidence that his creation is nothing but a foolish toy. The motor wagon travels 100 meters, then the engine stutters, coughs, and dies. Carl tries to restart it, spinning the flywheel while adjusting the fuel mixture. Nothing. The engine remains silent, stubborn, refusing to demonstrate the reliability it showed in the workshop. Behind him, the crowd begins to laugh. Horses tethered nearby defecate in apparent superiority, as if the natural order is reasserting itself against this mechanical interloper. The local newspaper's review is devastating. Herr Benz has created a nice attempt at mechanical propulsion, but it will never replace the reliability of horses. A horse can travel 50 kilometers without rest. A horse needs no complicated machinery to function. A horse does not break down in the middle of the street. requiring its owner to desperately tinker with incomprehensible mechanisms. The automobile is an interesting curiosity, nothing more. Carl retreats to his workshop, humiliated but not defeated. The engine works. He knows it works. The problem is not the concept, but the execution, not the theory, but the implementation. He needs better fuel mixing, more reliable ignition, stronger belt drives. Each problem has a solution, and each solution brings the automobile closer to practical reality. Through the rest of 1886 and into 1887, Carl refines and improves. Version 2 of the Motorwagen incorporates lessons from the failed demonstration. Version 3 adds innovations suggested by testing. Each iteration is better than its predecessor, more reliable, more powerful, more suitable for actual transportation rather than merely proving concepts. But orders remain at zero. No one wants to be the first to buy an unproven technology. No one wants to risk money on a device that failed publicly, spectacularly, in front of witnesses who laughed. The automobile exists, functions, represents the future of transportation, yet it sits in Carl's workshop gathering dust, a solution searching desperately for someone willing to acknowledge the problem. Debts continue mounting. The patent cost money. The prototypes consumed Bertha's remaining inheritance. The years of development left them with no savings, no reserves, nothing to fall back on if the automobile does not find buyers soon. They have created something revolutionary, but revolution does not pay bills. Innovation does not feed children. Success without sales is just expensive failure wearing a different mask. Carl and Bertha stand together in the workshop, looking at the Motorwagen, their creation, their gamble, their hope. It represents everything they have sacrificed, everything they have risked, everything they believe about the future. But belief does not make something real in the world's eyes. For that, they need something more. They need proof so dramatic, so undeniable, that even the skeptics must acknowledge that the automobile's time has arrived. What they do not know, what they cannot see as they contemplate their stalled revolution, is that the proof they need will come from an unexpected direction. The demonstration that changes everything will not come from Carl's technical refinements or improved designs. It will come from an act of courage so audacious that it will echo through history, proving that innovation requires not just technical genius, but the boldness to show the world what it refuses to see on its own. History turns on moments of audacity that seem obvious only in retrospect. We look back and wonder why anyone needed convincing, why the future's arrival required such dramatic demonstration. But those who live through revolutions cannot see what we see from our vantage point across time. They need proof. They need someone willing to risk everything, on belief that has not yet hardened into fact. August 5th, 1888, begins like any Sunday, with church bells and families preparing for worship. Carl sleeps late, exhausted from another week of refinements that have not translated into sales. He has improved the Motorwagen continuously, addressing every flaw, enhancing every system. The vehicle now runs more reliably than ever. Yet still, the orders do not come. Still, the world remains unconvinced. Bertha wakes at 4 a.m, before dawn colours the eastern sky. She moves through the dark house with practiced silence, rousing her sons, Eugen and Richard, aged 15 and 13. The boys dress quickly, confused but excited. Their mother's demeanour tells them something important is happening, though they do not yet understand what. She leaves a note for Carl, written in her careful script. "We are going to visit grandmother in Pforzheim." What she does not mention, what Carl will not discover until hours later, is that they are taking the Motorwagen. That this visit to grandmother, approximately 106 kilometers distant, will either prove the automobile's worth or destroy it in spectacular public failure. That his wife and sons are about to embark on what will become history's first long-distance automobile journey, through roads designed for horses, through towns that have never seen a motorized vehicle, through mountain passes that challenge even horse-drawn carriages. They push the motor wagon silently past Carl's bedroom window. The cobblestones are still wet with night dew slippery beneath their feet. Only when they reach the edge of town do they start the engine, Eugen spinning the flywheel while Bertha operates the fuel valve. The familiar sound of controlled explosions fills the morning air, announcing the beginning of a journey that will change transportation forever. The first challenge arrives quickly. Just outside Mannheim, the road climbs a hill that seems modest to a walker but presents a mountain to an underpowered vehicle. The motor wagon slows, the engine struggling, revolutions dropping as the load increases. Bertha steers while her sons jump off and push from behind, their shoes slipping on dewy grass, their combined effort, barely maintaining walking speed. The engine runs at maximum power, every explosion contributing its small force, but it is not quite enough without human assistance. They reach the crest, and the boys jump back aboard, laughing with exertion and adventure. This is not the dignified demonstration Carl might have planned, but it is real. It is 3 people crossing actual distance using mechanical power. The flaws are obvious, yes, but so is the potential. With a slightly more powerful engine, with better gearing, this hill would pose no challenge. The concept works. The execution simply needs refinement. At Heidelberg, they encounter a problem Carl never anticipated. Fuel supply. The motor wagon's tank holds approximately 4.5 litres of benzene. At the vehicle's consumption rate, this provides perhaps 30 kilometres of travel. For workshop testing, this is adequate. For a 106-kilometre journey, it is woefully insufficient. They need fuel, but where does one purchase fuel for an automobile when automobiles do not exist? Bertha stops at a pharmacy, the Stadtapotheke in Wiesloch. The pharmacist watches in astonishment as this woman, dressed for travel, explains that she needs petroleum ether, commonly sold as cleaning fluid. He sells solvents by the bottle for removing stains from fabric, never imagining any other use. Bertha purchases his entire stock, then pours it directly into a mechanical contraption that seems to breathe fire. This transaction, so mundane that neither party recognizes its significance, becomes history's first fuel purchase for an automobile. The pharmacist will later install a commemorative plaque marking his establishment as the world's first filling station. But in this moment, he simply watches in bewildered fascination as these travelers pour his cleaning fluid into their strange machine and continue their impossible journey. The road between Wiesloch and Pforzheim winds through the foothills of the Black Forest, a landscape of beauty and challenge. Hills that horse-drawn carriages climb steadily become obstacles requiring strategy and determination. Bertha learns to approach each ascent with maximum speed, using momentum to carry them as far as possible before the engine's limited power requires her sons to dismount and push. Near Bruchsal, disaster strikes. The fuel line clogs completely, starving the engine until it dies in the middle of the road. They coast to the roadside while other travellers pass, some offering help, others laughing at these foolish people who trusted a machine over proven horses. Bertha examines the fuel system with the careful attention of someone who has watched Carl work for years, who has absorbed mechanical understanding through proximity to genius. She identifies the blockage in the brass fuel line. The aperture is tiny, designed to meter fuel precisely but vulnerable to any particle of debris. She needs something small enough to fit inside, rigid, enough to push the obstruction through, long enough to reach. Her hand goes to her hair, removing a hat pin, its point small and sharp. She inserts it carefully into the fuel line, feeling for resistance. There, a solid blockage. She pushes, gently at first, then with more force, until something gives way and the pin slides through cleanly. They restart the engine. It coughs to life immediately, running smoothly now that fuel flows freely again. This moment, Bertha using a hatpin to clear a fuel line on a roadside in rural Germany, might seem trivial, but it demonstrates something crucial. The automobile, for all its complexity, can be maintained by someone with intelligence and determination. It does not require specialized training or equipment. Problems can be diagnosed and solved with improvised tools and mechanical intuition. The Swabian Alps present the journey's greatest challenge. The road climbs steadily, switchbacks carved into mountainsides that test even the strongest. Horses. The motorwagen labours upward, engines screaming at maximum revolutions, speed dropping until they are barely moving. Other travellers pass easily, their horses handling the grade with the stamina of creatures evolved for exactly this kind of sustained effort. But what the motorwagen lacks in climbing ability, it reveals in descent. The downhill side should be effortless, gravity doing the work. Instead, a new problem emerges. The wooden brake blocks, designed for gentle stops in Mannheim, wear smooth from friction. On steep descents they provide almost no stopping power. The motorwagon accelerates, rolling faster and faster, while Bertha fights to control speed and direction simultaneously. She stops at a cobbler's shop in a village whose name history has not preserved. The cobbler, like the pharmacist, finds himself participating in transportation history without recognizing it. Bertha explains her need. Leather strips nailed to the wooden brake blocks to provide better grip. The cobbler nods, understanding the principle even if not the application. Within an hour, he has crafted and installed leather brake pads, accepting payment with the same stolid competence he applies to shoes. These improvised repairs work perfectly. The leather grips the wheels firmly, controlling speed on descents without wearing out. Karl will later incorporate this exact solution into production motorwagons, though he will never know that the innovation came from a rural cobbler and his desperate customer on a Sunday afternoon. Each breakdown becomes a lesson. Each solution becomes an improvement that Karl will later incorporate. Bertha is not just proving that the motorwagon can travel long distances. She is conducting mobile testing under real-world conditions, discovering flaws that workshop testing could never reveal, developing fixes that transform the automobile from interesting prototype into practical vehicle. They reach Pforzheim at dusk, having averaged approximately 12 kilometers per hour, including stops for fuel, repairs, and the countless moments when her sons pushed from behind. The journey has taken approximately 14 hours, time that a horse-drawn carriage might match but with far greater expense and the need for multiple horse changes. The motorwagon has carried 3 people over 106 kilometers using perhaps 15 liters of fuel at a cost of pennies compared to feeding and maintaining horses. Bertha telegraphs Karl that evening. The message is brief, just 2 sentences, but they contain both love and revolution. Arrived safely in Pforzheim. The motorwagon climbs hills wonderfully with 2 additional gears. This last sentence is particularly brilliant. She has identified the crucial improvement needed, confirmed through experience rather than theory. The engine provides adequate power on level ground, but hills require different gearing to maintain momentum. Add this feature, and the automobile transforms from marginal to practical. Karl receives the telegram in shock. His wife and sons have driven his prototype over 100 kilometers. They could have been injured or killed if the motorwagon failed catastrophically. They could have been stranded in remote areas with no way to return home. They could have turned the automobile into a public joke if the journey ended in disaster. Yet they succeeded, and in succeeding, they have given him the proof he needed. The return journey 3 days later attracts even more attention. Word has spread about the strange mechanical contraption that arrived in Pforzheim under its own power. Crowds gather along the route, watching as Bertha and her sons pass through towns and villages. Some people cheer, others remain skeptical, but no one laughs. The automobile has traveled over 200 kilometers in total, more than any horse could manage without rest and recovery. It has proven itself not as a workshop curiosity, but as a practical transportation solution. The journey changes everything. Orders begin arriving within weeks, first from wealthy individuals who want the prestige of owning this new technology, then from businessmen who recognize that mechanical transportation could transform commerce. The trickle becomes a stream, becomes a flood. By the end of 1888, Carl has more orders than he can fulfill with his small workshop. He incorporates Bertha's suggestions immediately. The second gear for Hills transforms the motorwagon's capabilities, allowing it to climb grades that previously required pushing. He strengthens the cooling system based on her observations of overheating during sustained climbs. He improves fuel capacity, making the vehicle less dependent on frequent refueling stops. Every modification addresses real problems discovered during real travel, making each successive motorwagon more practical than its predecessor. What Bertha accomplished goes beyond mechanical. Validation. She proved that automobiles could be operated by people without engineering degrees, that problems could be solved with improvisation and determination, that the future of transportation was not some distant possibility, but an immediate reality available to anyone brave enough to embrace it. Her journey was not just a test of the motorwagon, but a demonstration of human adaptability, showing that we could learn to navigate a mechanized world. History celebrates Carl as the automobile's inventor, and rightfully so. His technical genius made the motorwagon possible, but Bertha's courage made it real. Carl proved the automobile could exist. Bertha proved it should exist, that it could survive the messy reality of actual roads, actual travel, actual human needs. Innovation requires both kinds of proof, the theoretical demonstration that something is possible and the practical demonstration that it is useful. The 100-mile miracle, as it becomes known, represents a pivot, point in transportation history. Before Bertha's journey, the automobile was an interesting curiosity. After, it became an inevitable future. She did not just test a vehicle, she tested an idea that humans could trust machines for transportation, that mechanical power could replace biological power, that the world was ready for a revolution whether it knew it or not. In the streets of Pforzheim, in the pharmacy at Wiesloch, in the cobbler's shop whose name we do not remember, the future announced itself quietly, without fanfare or formal recognition. Just a woman and her sons, demonstrating through action what words could never convey. The age of the horse was ending, and the age of the automobile had begun. The question was no longer if mechanical transportation would replace biological, but how quickly the world would accept what had already become inevitable. There is a peculiar acceleration that happens when an idea whose time has come finally breaks through resistance. For years, progress crawls at a pace that makes glaciers seem swift. Then suddenly, almost overnight, the impossible becomes inevitable and adoption accelerates beyond anyone's predictions. The automobile's transformation from curiosity to commodity demonstrates this pattern with startling clarity. News of Bertha's journey spreads through Germany's newspapers like wildfire through drought-stricken forest. The story has everything journalists crave: drama, innovation, a brave woman defying convention, and most importantly, verifiable facts. This was not a controlled demonstration on a closed course. This was over 100 kilometers of public roads, hills, towns, witnesses, by the hundreds. You cannot fake such a journey. You cannot dismiss it as workshop magic or favorable conditions. The Mannheimer Morgenblatt, the same newspaper that mocked Karl's failed demonstration 2 years earlier, now publishes a front-page story with the headline, "Woman drives mechanical carriage over 100 kilometers without horses." The article's tone has shifted from skepticism to astonishment. What seemed impossible has been accomplished by Frau Bertha Benz and her sons. The motorwagen, created by Herr Karl Benz, has proven itself capable of sustained travel over considerable distance. Those who doubted the automobile's practicality must now reconsider their position. This newspaper story gets reprinted across Germany, then throughout Europe. Each retelling adds embellishments, some accurate, others creative. By the time the story reaches Paris, Bertha has supposedly climbed the Alps themselves and fought off bandits who tried to steal this miraculous machine. The truth is dramatic enough without exaggeration, but truth rarely survives transmission through excited journalists. Orders arrive at Karl's workshop like letters to someone who has won a lottery. The first come from wealthy individuals in Munich and Berlin, people with money to spare on novel experiences. They want the prestige of owning what only a handful of people possess, the social currency of being first to embrace the future. Each order represents 4,000 marks, more money than Karl has seen in years of struggle. He stands in his workshop reading these letters, unable to quite believe that the world has finally caught up to his vision. But wealthy hobbyists alone cannot sustain an industry. The transformation from boutique curiosity to viable business requires scaling production beyond what one man can accomplish in a cramped workshop. Karl faces a challenge completely different from those he has overcome. He must become not just an inventor but a manufacturer, creating systems for consistent production rather than one-off prototypes. He expands the Mannheim workshop, hiring additional machinists and metalworkers. By the end of 1888, 12 people work for Benz and Company, each one learning to build automobiles through a combination of instruction and improvisation. There are no textbooks on automobile manufacturing because no one has manufactured automobiles before. Every process must be developed from scratch, every technique refined through trial and error. The challenge of consistent quality nearly defeats them. In Karl's hands, with his intuitive understanding of mechanical systems, each motorwagen works perfectly. But when assistants build components, subtle variations emerge. A piston slightly out of round, a gear tooth filed imprecisely. These tiny differences, imperceptible to untrained eyes, cause engines to run roughly or fail completely. Karl must develop measurement tools and training methods, must document what previously existed only in his mind. By 1890, 25 motorwagons are operating on European roads, each one slightly improved from its predecessors. This iterative improvement becomes Karl's manufacturing philosophy: build, test, learn, modify, repeat. Version 4 adds a mechanical brake for the front wheel after a customer nearly collides with a horse. Version 5 includes a hand-operated horn after several near misses with pedestrians who do not hear the approaching vehicle. Each customer becomes an unwitting tester, discovering problems that Karl then solves for all future buyers. Émile Roger changes everything. This French bicycle manufacturer visits Mannheim in 1891, ostensibly to observe Karl's manufacturing processes for an article in a cycling magazine. But Roger sees something beyond journalism: opportunity. France has wealth, a culture that celebrates innovation, and crucially, roads better maintained than Germany's rutted country lanes. The French appetite for novelty and status could make Paris the automobile capital of the world. Roger negotiates exclusive French distribution rights over a dinner that extends past midnight. Karl, exhausted from a 14-hour workday, agrees to terms he barely comprehends. 50% of each sale goes to Roger in exchange for handling all French marketing, sales and service. It seems like highway robbery until Roger demonstrates what aggressive marketing can accomplish. Within 3 months, motorwagons are puttering past the Eiffel Tower, creating scenes that attract crowds of astonished Parisians. Roger stages races, exhibitions, drives through fashionable neighborhoods at times when the wealthy are promenading. He understands that selling automobiles requires selling a vision of modernity, of progress, of being the kind of person who embraces the future rather than clinging to the past. The French embrace what Germans initially rejected. Perhaps it is cultural, the French love of novelty versus German preference for proven reliability. Perhaps it is economic, France's wealth concentrated in Paris versus Germany's distribution across multiple cities. Perhaps it is simply timing, the automobile arriving when French society is ready to accept it. Whatever the reason, sales in. France explode beyond anyone's projections. Roger sells 350 motor wagons in 1893 alone, more than Karl sold in Germany during the previous 5 years combined. The revenue transforms Benz and Company from struggling workshop to profitable enterprise. Karl can finally pay his debts, can stop worrying about next month's expenses, can focus on improvement rather than survival. The irony is not lost on him. He invented the automobile in Germany, but France makes it viable. Competition erupts from unexpected directions, and here is where the story becomes less about one man and more about an entire industry discovering itself simultaneously. Gottlieb Daimler, working just 125 kilometers away in Stuttgart, has developed his own automobile using a different technical approach. Where Karl's engine is slow and heavy, Daimler's runs at higher speeds with better power-to-weight ratios. The two men never meet, never collaborate, become rivals, without intending rivalry. In France, Peugeot begins manufacturing automobiles under license from Daimler. In America, Ransom Olds establishes the Oldsmobile Company. In Britain, Frederick Lanchester develops his own unique design. Across the industrialized world, inventors who have been working in isolation suddenly realize they are part of a movement, a revolution in transportation that is happening simultaneously in dozens of workshops and factories. This simultaneous innovation suggests something profound. The automobile's time had arrived whether any single inventor succeeded or not. If Karl had failed, someone else would have succeeded. If Daimler had never been born, the automobile would still have emerged. There is a tide in technological development, driven by accumulated knowledge and social need, that makes certain innovations inevitable. Individuals ride this tide, sometimes ahead of it, sometimes behind, but the tide itself moves independently of any single person. Yet, recognizing inevitability should not diminish individual achievement. Karl solved specific problems in specific ways, made choices that influenced how millions of subsequent automobiles were designed. His four-stroke engine, his differential gear, his electrical ignition, these became templates that others followed. Being first matters, not because it makes you sole creator, but because it influences everyone who comes after. Benz and Company responds to competition by scaling production beyond what seems possible. The Mannheim factory expands from 12 workers in 1890 to 430 by 1899. They produce 572 vehicles that year, making Benz the world's largest automobile manufacturer. Think about that transformation. In 11 years, Karl goes from one man in a cramped workshop, unable to pay rent, to employing half of Mannheim in a factory that dominates global automobile production. This scaling requires innovations in the in-Karl eye, manufacturing that parallel Karl's earlier technical innovations. The assembly process must be standardized so that any worker can complete any step. Parts must be interchangeable so that components from different batches fit together without custom filing. Quality control systems must catch defects before they reach customers. Karl, who spent 20 years focused on making engines work, must now master production systems, supply chains, worker training, all the unglamorous infrastructure that transforms invention into industry. The man who once couldn't afford coal for heating now employs workers who earn enough to buy their own homes. The workshop that smelled of poverty and desperation now smells of machine oil and productivity. Success, when it finally arrives after decades of failure, arrives so completely that it seems almost excessive. But this is how transformation happens. Not gradually and steadily, but in sudden accelerations that reshape entire landscapes. By 1900, 8,000 automobiles navigate Earth's roads, each one descendant in some way from Carl's original motor wagon. The number seems tiny by future standards, but consider what it represents. 8,000 families who have chosen mechanical transportation over horses. 8,000 demonstrations that the future is not coming, but has arrived. 8,000 points of no return. Because once you have experienced the freedom and convenience of mechanical self-propulsion, returning to horses feels like regression. The automobile begins reshaping infrastructure even before its widespread adoption. Cities start paving streets with asphalt instead of cobblestones, creating surfaces better suited to pneumatic tires. Entrepreneurs open fuel stations at crossroads, where only blacksmith shops existed before. Mechanics who once repaired horse-drawn wagons retrain to service engines and transmissions. The ecosystem necessary to support automobiles grows up around the automobiles themselves, each element enabling further expansion. Bertha watches this transformation with mixed emotions. She is proud of what she and Carl accomplished together, proud of the industry they birthed through stubbornness and courage. Yet she also sees how success has changed Carl. The passionate inventor, who once spent hours explaining his visions to her, now spends those hours in business meetings, negotiating contracts, managing production schedules. The workshop that was their private kingdom now employs hundreds, and with those employees come responsibilities that distance Carl from the hands-on work he loves. This is the price of success that no one mentions in the celebrations. You achieve your dream, but the achievement transforms you into someone who can no longer pursue the dream in its original form. Carl will never again spend weeks alone in a workshop, trying thousands of variations until something works. He will never again have the luxury of failure, of learning through mistakes that cost only time and materials. He is now the head of a company, a symbol of industrial progress, a man whose decisions affect hundreds of families depending on Benz and company for their livelihoods. Yet despite these burdens, despite the transformation from inventor to industrialist, Carl remains fundamentally the same person who built tiny engines from scraps as a boy. He walks through the factory floor daily, stopping to examine components, suggest improvements, share knowledge with machinists half his age. He maintains a private workshop where he continues experimenting with engine designs, transmission systems, suspension improvements. Success has not killed his curiosity, has not made him complacent. The new century arrives with celebrations across Europe. Fireworks, champagne, proclamations that the 20th century will bring unimaginable progress. Carl and Bertha attend these celebrations, toasting the future alongside people who do not remember when the automobile seemed impossible. They smile and accept congratulations, but privately they understand something the celebrants do not. The transformation has only begun. 8,000 automobiles represent a proof of concept, nothing more. The real revolution, the one that will reshape civilization at every level, still lies ahead. Every revolution devours its children, they say, but some revolutions devour the entire world and remake it in shapes the revolutionaries never imagined. The automobile transforms human civilization so completely, so fundamentally, that by the time its consequences become clear, reversing them has become impossible. Carl Benz watches this transformation with the complex emotions of a parent seeing their child grow into something both magnificent and terrible. By 1900, 8,000 automobiles navigate Earth's roads, but this number explodes with astonishing speed. 1910 sees 180,000, 1920 reaches 8 million. The growth curve defies all projections, all rational predictions. Every year, manufacturers double their output and still cannot satisfy demand. The automobile stops being a luxury item and becomes something more essential, a symbol of modernity, of progress, of participation in the 20th century's promise. Cities begin transforming themselves to accommodate this invasion of machines. Streets that were never designed for speed or volume of traffic must be widened, paved, marked. Boston becomes the first city to install a traffic light in 1914, a simple manually operated system where police officers control the flow of vehicles through busy intersections. The concept spreads rapidly because the alternative is chaos, accidents multiplying as automobile numbers increase beyond what unregulated intersections can handle. London paves its streets with asphalt in massive projects that employ thousands of workers and consume millions of pounds sterling. The smooth surfaces reduce wear on vehicles, decrease noise, allow higher speeds, but they also eliminate the texture that warned drivers when roads were slippery, remove the natural drainage that cobblestones provided. Each solution creates new problems, requiring new solutions in endless cascades of unintended consequences. Gas stations appear at crossroads, transforming rural landscapes. What were once empty fields or small villages become commercial centers built around the automobile's needs. Fuel, oil, water, repair services, all the infrastructure necessary to keep vehicles running sprouts like mushrooms after rain. Young men who might have become blacksmiths or farmers instead become mechanics, learning the mysteries of internal combustion, building careers around machines that did not exist when their fathers were young. The transformation of geography into psychology might be the automobile's most profound effect. For all of human history, distance was measured in time required to traverse it. A village 50 kilometers away was a day's journey, a separation measured not in space but in effort, fatigue, commitment. The automobile collapses these psychological distances with ruthless efficiency. That same 50 kilometers becomes a 2-hour drive, so trivial that people make the journey for lunch, for shopping, for reasons that would have seemed absurd in the age of horses. Consider what this means for how humans organize their lives. Lovers can court beyond their immediate villages, expanding the pool of potential partners from hundreds to thousands. Workers can commute from countryside to city, maintaining rural peace while accessing urban opportunity. Families can visit relatives previously seen once per decade, maintaining connections that distance once severed. The automobile makes mobility so easy that staying in one place starts to seem like a choice rather than a necessity. Suburbs begin their inexorable sprawl. These strange hybrid zones, neither urban nor rural, exist only because automobiles make them possible. Before the car, you lived either in cities where you could walk to work and markets, or in countryside where you grew your own food. The suburb offers a third option. Single-family homes with private yards, connected by ribbons of concrete to commercial and industrial centres. It seems like the best of both worlds until you realize it requires both worlds, demands constant movement between home and everything else. The front porch, that architectural feature where neighbours gathered in evenings to talk and share their lives, yields to the garage. This transition seems minor until you recognize what it represents, a shift from public interaction to private isolation. The porch faces the street, inviting connection. The garage faces inward, hiding the car that will carry you away from neighborhood into private destinations. Community fragments as mobility increases, a trade-off that seems worthwhile until you calculate what was lost. Yet darkness shadows these transformations, and Carl Benz, watching from Mannheim, cannot ignore it. By 1920, automobile accidents kill 30,000 people annually worldwide. 30,000. More deaths per year than many wars. These are not soldiers who signed up for risk, but ordinary people crossing streets, driving to work, walking on roads, suddenly made lethal by vehicles traveling at speeds biology never prepared humans to handle. The numbers horrify Carl. He did not invent the automobile to kill people. He invented it to free them from the tyranny of horses, from the limitations of muscle power. But freedom and danger are sometimes inseparable. A horse traveling at 30 kilometers per hour could be controlled, stopped, avoided. An automobile at 60 kilometers per hour becomes a projectile, its momentum so great that steering and braking happen too slowly to prevent collisions. Humans gain speed but lose the margin of error that kept them safe. The internal combustion engine's appetite for petroleum begins reshaping geopolitics in ways that will dominate the entire 20th century. Oil, that dark liquid buried in ancient rock formations, suddenly becomes more valuable than gold. Nations with oil become powerful, while those without become dependent. The Ottoman Empire, that crumbling remnant of medieval glory, suddenly matters because it sits atop vast reserves. Persia becomes a chess piece in games between Britain and Russia, its sovereignty less important than its geology. World War I, that catastrophe that consumes a generation of young men, is partly fought over oil access. Tanks and aircraft and trucks all require fuel, making petroleum as strategically crucial as ammunition. The Treaty of Versailles that ends the war includes provisions about oil rights, recognizing that future conflicts will be won or lost based on energy supplies. Karl's invention, created to improve transportation, has become a weapon that reshapes global power dynamics. Cities, designed for walking, become mazes of parking lots and highways. Los Angeles, a small town in 1886 when Karl patented his motor wagon, grows into a sprawling metropolis defined entirely by automobile access. The city has no real center, no density, just an endless spread of roads and parking spaces connecting destinations that exist only because cars make them accessible. It represents both the automobile's ultimate triumph and a cautionary tale about letting one technology dominate urban design. The air in cities changes quality. As automobile numbers increase, Los Angeles again provides the extreme example. By 1940, the city experiences its first recognized smog episodes. Air so thick with exhaust that visibility drops to 100 meters, and people's eyes water from chemical irritation. The internal combustion engine's byproducts, once diluted by vast atmosphere, now concentrate in valleys and cities until they become visible, tangible, dangerous. The irony kills Karl slowly. He invented the automobile to eliminate horse manure from city streets, to remove the stench and filth that made urban life unpleasant. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. But automobile exhaust proves far more insidious than horse waste ever was. You can see manure, smell it, shovel it away. Exhaust is invisible, odorless in small concentrations, cumulative in effects that take decades to manifest. Carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, particulates, all accumulate in lungs and atmosphere, creating problems that won't be fully understood for generations. The freedom of mobility creates the slavery of traffic. By 1930, major cities experience rush hour congestion, where millions sit motionless in machines capable of 160 kilometers per hour. The average speed during peak times in Manhattan drops below the pace of horse-drawn carriages from 50 years earlier. Progress has somehow circled back to create the very inefficiency it was supposed to eliminate, just with more noise and expense and frustration. Karl walks through Mannheim in the 1920s. This city he helped transform into an industrial center. Automobiles dominate the streets now, their noise constant, their presence overwhelming. He remembers when these same streets were quiet enough to hear conversations from inside houses, when you could cross without looking because horses made sounds that warned of their approach. Now the city feels hostile to pedestrians, designed for machines rather than humans. He watches children playing and notices they stay in fenced yards, instead of roaming the streets as he did as a boy. The automobile has stolen their freedom, even as it promised to expand everyone's mobility. Children cannot ride vehicles, so vehicles transform streets from play spaces into dangers to be avoided. Another unintended consequence, another price of progress that no one calculated when the cars revolution began. Yet Carl cannot bring himself to regret his invention. For every death, for every problem created, the automobile has enabled countless improvements. Rural doctors can reach patients in minutes instead of hours, saving lives that would have been lost in the horse age. Fire departments respond faster to emergencies. Ambulances carry the injured to hospitals before shock can kill them. The mobility that creates some problems solves others, making any overall judgment impossible. The transformation of courtship and family life might be the automobile's most intimate effect. Young people can now date without chaperones, driving to destinations beyond parental oversight. This freedom accelerates social changes already underway, contributing to the redefinition of relationships and marriage that characterizes the early 20th century. Parents who once controlled their children's social lives through geographical restriction find that control evaporating like morning dew under the sun of automotive mobility. Economic transformation follows inevitably. Industries built around horse transportation collapse. Stable owners, saddle makers, farriers all find their skills obsolete within a generation. Some adapt, becoming mechanics and garage owners. Others are simply left behind by progress that does not pause to consider individual casualties. Creative destruction, economists call it, recognizing that innovation always kills some jobs while creating others, though the killed and created are rarely the same people. The assembly line, perfected by Henry Ford for automobile production, revolutionizes manufacturing across all industries. The techniques developed to build cars efficiently spread to every product, every process. Workers become specialized, performing one task repeatedly rather than building complete items. Productivity soars, costs drop, but work becomes monotonous, soul-crushing in ways that craftsmen never experienced. Another trade-off, another consequence no one fully anticipated. By 1925, the automobile industry employs millions worldwide. It consumes vast quantities of steel, rubber, glass, leather. It drives innovation in material science, in manufacturing processes, in business organization. It becomes the engine that powers industrial economies, creating wealth and employment on scales that make previous industries seem quaint. The automobile is no longer just transportation. It is the foundation of modern industrial civilization. Carl Benz, watching all of this unfold from his villa in Ladenburg where he is retired, feels like a man who has summoned forces he cannot control. He invented the automobile to solve specific problems: the inefficiency of horses, the limitations of rail transport, the challenge of individual mobility. But his invention has taken on a life of its own, evolving in directions he never imagined, creating a world that would be incomprehensible to his younger self. On quiet evenings, he sits in his private workshop, surrounded by engines and tools and the smell of machine oil. He still tinkers, still experiments, still feels most alive when solving mechanical problems. But he knows that the age of the lone inventor has passed. The automobile's future belongs to corporations with thousands of employees, research departments with dozens of engineers, marketing campaigns with millions in budgets. Innovation has been industrialized, systematized, made routine. Bertha joins him sometimes, and they sit in comfortable silence, their hands occasionally touching as they have for 50 years. She understands what he feels because she shares it. Pride in their achievement mixed with uncertainty about its consequences. Satisfaction at solving problems mixed with recognition of problems created. They change the world together, and the world will never be the same. Whether that change was ultimately beneficial remains a question that history has not yet fully answered. In the end, every life becomes a story told by others, shaped by what came after, rather than what was lived during. The person you were matters less than what you set in motion, how your choices rippled forward through time, what echoes remain when the sound of your voice has faded into silence. Carl Benz dies on April 4th, 1929, at age 84, having lived to see the impossible transform into the ordinary. His death comes gently, as deaths go. No pain, no suffering, just an old man falling asleep and not waking up. He spends his final days in Ladenburg, surrounded by family, looking out at gardens that Bertha has tended for decades. His mind remains sharp until the end, still solving mechanical problems in his head, still imagining improvements to engines that now power 20 million vehicles across Earth's surface. When his heart finally stops, it is morning, and sunlight streams through the window of the room where he has slept beside Bertha for 57 years. The funeral procession includes 500 automobiles, their engines silent in respect for the man who taught them to speak. This gesture, turning off engines rather than running them, represents the highest honor that the automotive world can offer. The streets of Mannheim are lined with thousands of mourners, factory workers who built his designs, engineers who studied his patents, ordinary citizens who simply understand that their world exists because this man refused to accept that limitations must be permanent. The newspapers eulogize him as inventor, industrialist, pioneer. They list his achievements in columns of print. First gasoline-powered automobile, founder of Benz and Company, holder of hundreds of patents. But these accomplishments, impressive as they are, miss something essential about who Carl was and what he represented. He was a man who grew up in poverty so complete it should have crushed any dreams, who faced failures that would have broken lesser spirits, who persisted through decades when the world told him he was chasing the impossible. Bertha follows him in 1944, aged 95, dying in a Germany that has been destroyed and remade by wars fought partially over the resource her husband's invention made crucial. She lives long enough to see the automobile become so ubiquitous that young people cannot imagine life without it, long enough to see her maiden journey from Mannheim to Pforzheim celebrated as the heroic act it was, long enough to hear herself called co-inventor rather than mere supporter. Her obituary in the Mannheimer Morgenblatt calls her the first person to recognize the automobile's true potential and the courage to prove it through action. This recognition comes too late, as recognition often does for women whose contributions are initially attributed to their husbands. But history, given time, sometimes corrects its errors. Bertha's journey is now recognized as equal in detentions and importance to Carl's invention. Technical genius created the automobile, but courage made it real. Together they proved something that extends far beyond mechanics or transportation. Innovation requires not just technical genius, but partnerships strong enough to survive society's mockery, poverty's grinding pressure, failure's crushing weight. Carl's explosions of creativity needed Bertha's stabilizing wisdom. Her practical judgment needed his visionary audacity. They were complementary forces, neither complete without the other, stronger together than either could have been separately. Their DNA flows through every vehicle built since, though the connection has become so diffuse that few people recognize it. The four-stroke cycle that Carl perfected after 7 years of failures still powers most cars 140 years later. Internal combustion engines have been refined, improved, made more efficient, but the fundamental principle remains his. Fuel mixed with air, compressed, ignited, expanding gases, pushing pistons that turn crankshafts that produce rotational motion. Billions of engines, quintillions of explosions, all descendants of that New Year's Eve 1879 when Carl's prototype finally ran. The differential gear he calculated with paper and pencil, sitting at a desk by lamplight because they couldn't afford better, now guides Mars rovers across alien soil. NASA engineers use essentially the same principle Carl invented to allow wheels to rotate at different speeds during turns. The context has changed from German roads to Martian craters, but the mathematics remain identical. Good engineering is timeless, transcending its original application to solve problems its creator never imagined. The electrical ignition system he pioneered, generating sparks through trembler coils and timing them with mechanical precision, now sparks in racing engines spinning 15,000 times per minute. Formula One engines, representing the absolute peak of combustion technology, still use ignition concepts Carl developed in his cramped workshop. Engineers have added electronic controls and exotic materials, but the fundamental principle of precisely timed electrical sparks igniting compressed fuel remains exactly as Carl designed it. Even electric vehicles, seemingly rejecting his internal combustion legacy, use his fundamental architecture: chassis, wheels, steering, suspension, differential gears, independent propulsion. All the structural elements Carl pioneered continue in vehicles that replace his engine with batteries and electric motors. The source of power has changed, but the vehicle concept remains his. Tesla and Rivian and every other electric manufacturer are building variations on the template Carl created when he bolted an engine to a three-wheeled frame in 1885. Autonomous cars navigate using sensors and computers that would seem like magic to Carl, but they follow roads that exist only because he proved humans need not be bound by biological transportation limits. Without the automobile revolution, cities would have developed differently, remaining compact and walkable rather than sprawling across landscapes. The road infrastructure that autonomous vehicles require for navigation exists only because Carl's invention made roads crucial to modern life. The Bertha Benz Memorial Route, established in 2008, retraces her revolutionary journey from Mannheim to Pforzheim. Modern drivers complete in 90 minutes what took her 14 hours, their climate-controlled vehicles gliding effortlessly over hills that required her sons to push. Yet they travel the same psychological distance, from skepticism through challenge to triumph, from doubt about new technology to acceptance of its possibilities. The route has become a pilgrimage for automotive enthusiasts, a way to connect with the moment when the automobile transformed from interesting prototype to practical vehicle. People drive it in vintage cars, in modern vehicles, even in electric cars, each journey honoring the courage required to bet everything on a technology that seemed destined to fail. The hills that tested Bertha still test vehicles, though modern engineering makes the challenge trivial. What was once desperate becomes ceremonial, but the memory persists. Museums in Mannheim and Stuttgart preserve not just machines but moments captured in physical objects. The workbench where Carl wept from exhaustion and despair, the wood grain still marked by oil from his hands. The hat-pin Bertha used to clear a clogged fuel line, its tip worn smooth from that single repair. The receipt from the Stadtapotheke in Wiesloch, history's first fuel purchase, written in faded ink on yellowed paper. These artifacts are not valuable in themselves, just ordinary objects, but they connect us directly to people who lived 140 years ago, who felt emotions we can recognize, who solved problems we still face. The Motorwagen Carl, patented in 1886, sits in the Deutsches Museum in Munich, protected behind glass, its tubular frame and exposed engine visible to millions of visitors each year. Children press their faces against the barrier, amazed that such a simple machine could launch a revolution. Their parents take photographs, trying to capture something that transcends the physical object. What they are really photographing is a moment when human capability expanded, when what seemed impossible became inevitable because two people refused to surrender to failure. These artifacts whisper lessons that extend beyond automotive history. They remind us that world-changing innovation emerges not from committees or corporations, but from individuals who refuse to accept that current limitations must be permanent limitations. That technical genius requires supportive partnership to survive the marathon from concept to reality. That courage sometimes means betting everything on belief that has not yet hardened into fact. That the greatest journeys begin not with detailed plans, but with someone brave enough to imagine a different path forward. Consider what Carl and Bertha accomplished with resources that seem laughable by modern standards. No computer simulations, no advanced materials, no research grants or government funding, no supply chains or specialized tools, just intelligence, determination, and partnership strong enough to survive 2 decades of poverty and mockery. They proved that innovation does not require vast resources, only vast commitment, only refusal to quit when quitting seems reasonable. The automobile's transformation from impossible dream to mundane reality demonstrates something profound about human capability. We are not limited by what we inherit, but by what we imagine. The horses that dominated roads for 3,000 years seemed permanent, their replacement unthinkable, until someone thought it anyway and persisted through failure until thought became reality. What other impossibilities might yield to similar persistence? What other limitations might prove temporary if someone refuses to accept them? Every morning, 1 billion people start engines that are descendants of Carl's prototype. Most never think about this inheritance, never consider the struggles that made their morning commute possible. The automobile has become invisible through familiarity, as fundamental to modern life as electricity or running water. Yet behind this invisibility lies a story of human persistence, of refusing to accept that the world must remain as you found it. In every engine's pulse beats the heart of a man who transformed bankruptcy into breakthrough. Every differential gear remembers the 17 attempts Carl required to achieve smooth operation. Every electrical spark honors the 7 years he spent proving that internal combustion could be controlled, tamed, made useful. The automobile is not just technology, but testament to what becomes possible when technical genius meets courage, meets partnership strong enough to survive society's doubt. The revolution that began in a cramped workshop in Mannheim has reshaped human civilization so completely that we can barely imagine the world Carl entered. We measure distance in time rather than space. We move between cities as easily as our ancestors moved between rooms. We have gained mobility beyond what any previous generation could imagine. Whether we have also gained wisdom, whether we have used this mobility well, remains an open question that each generation must answer for itself. Carl and Bertha could not have predicted where their invention would lead. They saw it as liberation from horses, as improvement in transportation, a solution to specific problems. They did not foresee suburbanization, climate change, traffic fatalities, oil wars, all the unintended consequences that flow from giving humans unprecedented mobility, but neither could they have prevented these consequences. Once you give humanity new capability, how that capability gets used transcends any individual's control. Yet, for all the complexity, for all the unintended consequences, the core story remains simple and inspiring. 2 people refused to accept limitation. They worked when others rested. They persisted when others surrendered. They believed when others doubted. And through that refusal, that persistence, that belief, they changed the world forever. Stand in their workshop in Mannheim, now a museum, and feel the presence of possibility. This is where the impossible became inevitable. This is where 2 people proved that the future need not resemble the past. This is where human transportation transformed from biological to mechanical, where 3,000 years of horses yielded to decades of engines, where belief strong enough to survive failure finally achieved triumph that echoes through eternity. The workshop is quiet now, its tools silent, its workbench empty. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of that New Year's Eve 1879, when an engine finally ran and the world changed forever. You can hear Carl's joy and Bertha's relief, their recognition that 7 years of sacrifice had not been wasted. that the dream they married was finally becoming real. That echo continues, carried forward through 140 years of engines starting, wheels turning, journeys beginning. Every automobile ever built contains a piece of their story, their struggle, their triumph. And every time someone starts an engine and travels beyond walking distance, they participate in the revolution that Carl and Bertha began in that workshop so long ago, when the future arrived one heartbeat at a time, powered by controlled explosions and impossible dreams.